So I was going to read a commentary or a statement that I thought was quite interesting about the book of Deuteronomy. The author doesn't really matter. So if you just sit back and listen and tell me what you think about what we've read. So the author is going to break up the book of Deuteronomy into different sections, just like we had already discovered. And once we've done this, we'll go to the board and we'll actually write out the sections, because you've had enough time now to look at the book and break it down, hopefully. We'll do it together for those who haven't managed to do that. So we already identified that this section, which we might call the statutes and judgments, begin in chapter 12. This person recognizes that. With this section, chapter 12 to 26, we have at length reached the legislation to which all that has gone before, in form at least, a prelude. But in its general outline, this code, if it can be called so, has a very unexpected character. When we speak of a code of laws in modern days, what we mean is a series of statutes carefully arranged under suitable headings, dealing with the rights and duties of the people and providing remedies for all possible wrongs. Then behind these laws, there is the executive power of the government, pledged to enforce them and ready to punish any breaches of them which may be committed. So, as you read through this, I want us to understand that this person is addressing many of the problems that we face as a movement and as a church, and also just as theologians, scholars, people who actually study their Bibles. When we come to the book of Deuteronomy, how do we deal with much of what we read? And I think there's much confusion when we read, particularly the book of Deuteronomy, but even you can go to other portions of what we would call the law, the 5 books of Moses. And the reason for that is because if someone attacks me for not doing something from, say, just Deuteronomy, what can I easily do? Attack them back, can't I? Yeah? I can say, let's see what's growing in your garden. Why would I say that? Someone starts attacking me, that I'm not doing something according to Deuteronomy. What attack is that? Why would I go to their garden and have a look? Put your hand up. No one knows? We all know the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, we all know the 5 books of Moses. If we want to extend it past Deuteronomy, it's the same issue, same principle. Why would I attack their garden? My brother? No idea? You do have an idea?
It's because we find a statement in Deuteronomy that says you should not mix different seeds in one garden.
So simply put, Moses, the book of Deuteronomy, says in a garden, don't mix the plants. And what does everyone know today? You should mix plants. Why? Why do we mix plants together? What purpose does it serve? Interdependence. I'm going to call it protection. Is that okay? So you mix the plants to protect them. One plant protects the other. They're interdependent. Moses says you're not allowed to do that. So if you ask someone who has this issue in Deuteronomy, they don't have an answer. Then I would say, okay, we'll leave that one, because you live in the city, you don't have a garden. I say, have you checked your label on your clothes? Why would I attack people on their label? It's not the gender issue. Why would I attack people on their labels? My brother. So don't mix the fabrics in one garment. And what does everybody do? We don't even look. We just say it's nice colour, nice fit. We don't even look at the material. So how do we address that? Most of the time, we ignore it. It's like going to, do you call it potluck when you go to church and there's lots of food? What do you call it here? Potluck, you call it potluck, same. So it's like when you go to potluck, you pick and choose what you like, what is your favourite. And should we do that? Should we do that, my brother? We should pick and choose what verse we like and ignore all the other ones. We should do that? No. So when it comes to food, obviously, at the potluck, but I'm using potluck as an example, we shouldn't do that with the Bible, should we? We should have a consistent pattern or rule as we approach any body of work. Do you agree with that? Sorry? Come again. So when we approach a body of work, a book, should we not be approaching that book with a consistent rule or a consistent perspective? We shouldn't, or we should? We should not be consistent. Isn't that what? So if we're not going to be consistent, I'll say, well, I'll do one thing in this verse and I'll do another thing in that verse. So there's no consistency. So I can mix all of my rules together.
Now, what I mean is that, like, you go to the other verse, then you are going to get another one, and you go to the other verse, then you get another one. But if you bring them to maybe to another time, then how you are going to treat this verse is not the same you are going to treat another one.
How do you know you should treat verses? He said, you go to the original when it's all fine. When you bring it to a different history, then you're going to treat the verses differently. That's what you said. How do you know you're supposed to treat the verses differently? How do you even know how to treat the verses?
It's based on this spiritual.
So you have to have some kind of rule, some kind of consistency, don't you? So you agree then, you have to approach it all in the same way with a certain perspective. If you don't have some consistent rules, then you can end up doing what you want. Because that's what Adventists do. In fact, most people do. Actually, most Christians don't do that. What do most Christians do with Deuteronomy? They just throw it all away. At least they're consistent. What we do is we pick and choose. Sometimes people call it cherry picking, because people like to pick the best cherries. So we pick and choose what we like according to our understanding or our agenda or our perspective of things. So if you're liberal, you'll pick and choose some things. If you're conservative, you pick and choose other things with no consistency. We okay with that? Yeah? So why do you do that? Yeah. Do you do that? You agreed with me. That's what we do. So I said, do you do that? Now you're asking me, do what? You just agreed that you do it. Are you consistent? You are? So, you don't wear dresses because it says in the verse. Do you check what label your clothes are? You don't mix your fabrics? You never do. My question is, you follow one verse, but you break the other verse. You keep all the verses in Deuteronomy. What do you do in real life? Not the theory. What do you actually do?
In terms of what?
In terms of those rules in the book of Deuteronomy. Do you keep every single one, or do you keep none of them, or some of them?
I don't even look at them because they are of all dispensations.
So you throw them all away.
I see them symbolically.
All symbolically.
Yeah.
All of those.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes, according to me, we should have to be consistent, but considering the time and place and the situation. Like when we pick the same history from the writings of Ellen White, there are what she wrote by then. Like, for example, that buying Bible by those days was not okay with Christian. But now Bible is just something, you cannot follow that one, not to buy the Bible here. So the same thing, when we talk from the time of Moses, there are those things like the clothes we are wearing now are not of the same color. But he says to them not to be, but we are breaking that one. So our consistency will be based on the situation, the place, and the time.
So when you read the book of Deuteronomy, do you say every one of those statutes, if we call them that, are laws that are punishable if you don't practice them? Is that how you view Deuteronomy?
Yes, by that time, if they don't do, they are punishable.
Everyone else, is that how you view Deuteronomy? It's punishable then. And now?
No.
None of them are punishable, or some of them are.
In fact, we're not living in the same those days, because if we were to be in their position, we were punishable. But not now. There is a change.
Is it the same crime, but just we can't punish the crime, or is it no longer a crime?
Okay, God used to bring tests for different purpose and different time. By that time, it was their test. If you don't do, you are punished. And for our time here, we are given different tests apart from what they had.
So I'll ask my question again.
Yes.
Is it that it's not a crime any longer, or is it that you can't punish the crime?
There's no crime anymore.
So all of these things are no longer criminal,
They are no longer criminal.
but they were before.
Yes.
Does anybody disagree with that? They were all criminal acts before, but they're no longer criminal. You agree with that? You don't agree? How do you approach it? They're still punishable. Some of them. Some are punishable, but others are not punishable, and you don't know which ones are which.
The ones I don't understand,
So you've got three groups. Some are punishable, and you know about them. Some are not punishable, and you know about them. And there's a third group that you don't know what they mean, so you don't know what to do with them. Is that what you said?
I'm saying I know some are punishable,
That's
others I don't know, that is why they come.
Are there some that are not punishable that you know about? My brother, who had the hand up?
What I said earlier, all those rules, like the colors and so on, they were not punishable. The only thing is,
One second. Even in the original one, they were not punishable.
yeah, it's based on the tradition.
They were based upon tradition.
Yeah. But in our time, our tradition are different from yours. It means there's change.
Okay, so it was a tradition then, and now we don't even have to do most of it.
Yeah, I'm saying they were punishable during that time. But this time round, I cherry pick because in the book of Deuteronomy.
One second. In the past, they were punishable, these commandments, these statutes, but today he cherry picks.
Yeah.
And he's a teacher.
Yeah. So because
Watch him.
when you go to the book of Deuteronomy, there were different types of laws. Yeah. We have the Ten Commandments and those statutes which was put next to the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments are still existing up to now, but those ones, they are not punishable now.
Okay, so we laughed unnecessarily because he has some rules that he cherry picks. It's not just some cherry picking that he likes. He's following some kind of methodology. Sister Dorcas? When you look at Deuteronomy, there were some things that were punishable. So the dress issue was punishable, but today it's not. So some things were punishable then, they were criminal. They're still criminal, but there's no one who can punish us. Is that what you just said? They're still criminal, but no one can punish us. Oh, you didn't say that. I didn't hear it properly then. If you break the Sabbath, it's punishable then, because it's criminal. Is breaking the Sabbath criminal today? But why? Why are we not punished? You break it because you didn't plan. You mean it was an accident? I'm trying to understand what you said. Why is it not punishable today when you break the Sabbath? You don't know? Who's going to punish you back then? Before they stone you, what has to happen? They can't just stone you. What has to happen? In the English, or in the West, where I live, it's called due process. You have to go through a process before they can stone you. Stoning is the last bit. Who asks you? Because I wanted to. You asked me, I said because I wanted to. So what? It's none of your business. Sorry? We're controlled by the law too. Who's they? It's not your neighbour, is it? Who are your neighbour going to go to? The judges? Okay, so they have judges, so you go to court. We could go to court today. I'll take you to court because you worked on the Sabbath. And what will the court say today? They would laugh at me. It's not even they would do it, they'd laugh. In fact, you wouldn't even get to court because they would not accept the case. So the difference is we don't have judges today. So why don't we go to court and stone people? Because we don't have judges who do that stuff. That's what I meant. I don't mean we don't have judges. Okay, so what you're describing is that we don't live under a theocracy. You don't know what the word theocracy means? You do? Or you don't? So a theocracy is a nation that is governed by God's laws and God's rules. And the judges or the judicial arm, even the executive branch, have to follow the rules that God gave that nation and put them into practice. That's what a theocracy is. And we don't have that system, do we? Okay, so let me read what this person says. I know people had their hands up. When we speak of a code of laws in modern days, what we mean is a series of statutes carefully arranged under suitable heads, dealing with the rights and duties of the people and providing remedies for all possible wrongs. Then behind these laws, there is the executive power of the government. So that's what we've just discussed. There's laws, but we don't have an executive power, which we call the government, which stands behind these laws, pledged to enforce them and ready to punish any breaches of them which may be committed. That's the definition of the theocracy, if you know what that word means. In most cases, too, definite penalties were appointed for any disregard or transgression of them. Each word has been carefully selected, and it is understood that the very letter of the laws is to be binding. Everyone tried by them knows that the exact terms of the laws are to be pressed against him, and that the thing aimed at is a rigorous, literal enforcement of every detail. Do we agree with that? Does that even make sense to people? So what's going to happen is, there's a law. There's a law about abortion. There's many people who have an opinion on abortion. So people are going to say, you've broken the law. And then an advocate's going to say, no, that law wasn't broken. And they're going to win a court case. So in one part of the country, they win a court case. They say, that was not breaking the law. And in another court case, they say, oh, that was breaking the law. So you have two different judges making two different decisions. We understand that scenario? So now there's confusion. So what's going to happen? If we go to, I think in most countries they have this scenario. They may have different terms. What happens when you have two judges disagreeing? Or, in the case, even in one place, the judge makes a pronouncement, and then what do you do if you don't agree with the judge? You appeal. So when you appeal, who are you appealing to? That judge? Sorry, you made a mistake, can you have another go? No, how does the appeal system work? You go to another judge, and that other judge has power to counteract the work of this judge. So, however that model works, the appeals judge or the appeal court must be higher than this lower court, otherwise he can't change the ruling. You agree with that? So the appeal court says, we uphold his position, and you say, I don't like that answer either. Then what do you do? Then what do you do? Put your hand up. The court, the appeal court, and then what can you do? In most countries you've got one more option. You go to the Supreme Court. Supreme means all-powerful. So you're going to go to the all-powerful court. And they're going to check if the decision was right or wrong. And how do they make that decision? They just say, I don't like abortion, so I'm going to say, you lost the case. The other judge says, well, I like abortion, and you won the case. Is that how they do that? What do they do? What do they do?
There are rules, hard codes.
So I'll read what they do. Everyone tried by them, these rules, knows that the exact terms of the laws are to be pressed against him, and that the thing aimed at is a rigorous, literal enforcement of every detail. What are they going to do at the Supreme Court? They're going to read what? They're going to read the law. So the law is a document, and when they read that document, they're going to say, according to us, we think this law means this or that. We agree with that? So it's all based upon a rigorous reading of the details. And then you have the executive branch, which we just read about that. The executive branch, it says, then behind these laws, there is the executive power of the government pledged to enforce them and ready to punish any breaches of them which may be committed. So you have a judicial branch which says the law was broken. Does that make any difference? No, because we all know we've broken all the laws and we're still here. None of us are in prison. Why? Because you don't have a what? You don't have a government with executive power which is pledged. That means promised or committed to do what? To enforce the law. Is that right? And therefore, there's no one to punish us. So you can go and break Sabbath anytime you want to. No one's going to do anything to you. We okay with that? So for it to work, you have to have a judicial branch and an executive branch. Yes? And we haven't spoken about the legislature or the legislative branch. We haven't discussed that. That's a separate issue. Next sentence. Tried by such a conception, this Deuteronomic legislation looks very extraordinary and unintelligible. What does that mean? I don't even know if you agree with it. He says Deuteronomy looks strange and unintelligible, which means it's not intelligent. Who agrees with that? Nobody. Is that because we're all Christians, or is that because we're all bigots? That no one agrees with this person. Because this person was also a Christian. This person believed the book of Deuteronomy is extraordinary. What's the word for extraordinary? Someone said? Who spoke? Just put your hand up who spoke so I can just hear the word again. Who spoke? What did you say? Ridiculous. Extraordinary means ridiculous. It says, if you look at the book of Deuteronomy from this perspective, tried by such a conception, with this perspective, the book of Deuteronomy, the Deuteronomic legislation, looks ridiculous. Did he say Deuteronomy is ridiculous? What did he say? He says, if you look at Deuteronomy from this perspective, which perspective is that? Which perspective is that, Brother Rogers? Which perspective is this that he says is ridiculous? Say that, shout louder. As laws and restrictions, which? Executive branch? Which all have to be rigorously enforced according to what? How can you enforce something unless you check what? The letter of the law or the code. Do we agree with that? Because if you can't check the code, you can't enforce. Is that right? So does Sabbath have a code that's enforceable? Does Sabbath have a code that is enforceable? Yes or no? My brother? Does he have a code, words that are enforceable? Yes. Do we agree with that? Yeah? All you need to do is look at the sun when it goes down. If you do some work after that, it's what? It's enforceable because it's a strict code. It tells you the rules. So what you're not allowed to do when the sun goes down? What? You're not allowed to work. Is that enforceable? Is that an enforceable code? You're not allowed to work. Is it? So we all agree on the definition of what work is. Does everybody agree we have a common understanding of what a codified definition of work means? Yes or no? Someone says no, someone says yes. So, my child is ill and they vomit on the floor because they got food poisoning 2 minutes after sunset. What should I do with that? That's work. It's clearly work. We agree with that? Do you agree with that, my brother? It's work. So, do you think it's okay to clean it up? But we know it's against the law to do work. So we don't have an agreement on what work means now. Because I'm saying, leave it there. No work means no work. So we're already agreeing or disagreeing on what the definition of work is. So is it enforceable? How can it be enforceable? I'm keeping the law, and you're saying I'm being cruel to my family because I didn't clean up the mess. And I'm saying I don't care about that, you're breaking the rules. So who's right and who's wrong?
The one who is clean.
The one who's cleaning. I'm saying you are breaking the word work. And you're saying, what? What's your defense?
Then we shall go to the detail of what work.
Okay, and we disagree. Work means get a mop and move it. So, hopefully that point's been made. There are some things that are enforceable and some things that are not enforceable when it comes to such issues. And that's why he says, especially when it comes to the book of Deuteronomy, it's ridiculous to apply those standards for this book. And then he says, it's unintelligible. What does that mean? Sorry? Not intelligent. Another way of expressing that. Unintelligible. It's not wise. Foolish. It's ridiculous and foolish. It doesn't make any sense if you approach the book of Deuteronomy that way. And the problem is, that's what we tend to do. We tend to get all of the book and approach it from this legislative perspective, that it's legal. And when you do that, you end up with silly things happening. And then you end up saying, well, that's so silly, we'll disregard this verse and accept this verse, and we don't have any rules except to say, well, we live in a different age, so it's all okay now. You can't do that. The whole thing becomes a mess. And this is part of the problem when we come to Deuteronomy 22:5. Our whole approach is, at its very, in the very principles of it, is all wrong. The way we look at these verses, the way we approach them. Because how do we look at all of this stuff? As though it's law. That's the perspective that we approach it, and then we say, well, it doesn't fit, so we get rid of that one. And it doesn't fit here, so we get rid of that one. So I'm suggesting, which is why I read this to us, that it's the wrong perspective to look at it in this kind of fashion. There's more. In the first place, there is very little of orderly sequence in it. Some large sections of it have a consecutive character, but there is no perceivable order in the succession of these sections. Now, if you do a crime, they will say you broke section 5, subsection 2, part A. It's all codified under these titles. Here he says there's no actual consistency. It's just a whole heap of ad hoc rules that are all dumped together into one book. You know, like everyone in their kitchen has got one drawer. They keep all the, the pans in one place, the plates in another, and you have one drawer. And what do you do in that one drawer? You just throw everything in there, yeah, with no order. Most people have a drawer like that. That's what he's saying Deuteronomy looks like. And there has been very little attempt to group the individual precepts under related heads. Moreover, in many sections, there is no mention of a penalty for disobedience, nor is there any machinery for enforcing the prescriptions of the code. So what's the point of having a code? First of all, if you can't enforce them, there's no machinery to do that, and also you don't tell them what the penalty is. If you go to any government, it creates laws, and then it says what? For this crime, what does it say? In the UK, they call it sentencing guidelines. You must have a similar thing here. You don't leave it to the judges to say, a teenager stole a loaf of bread, so we're going to put them in prison for 20 years. Because the judge says, we've got to teach these people a lesson. What would we say to that? The judge needs to be taken down. So to stop that happening, what does the government introduce? Because they don't leave it to the judges to decide. They give guidelines. They say, for this crime, you've got this band, you can do 2 to 5 years. If it's grievous bodily harm, you really beat someone up badly, 10 to 12 years, for instance. Murder, accidental, 20 years. Murder, deliberate, life sentence, called sentencing guidelines. We have the similar things here. He says, this person, moreover, in many sections there is no mention of the penalty for the disobedience. They don't even know what the penalty is for the crime. That's one problem, so you have to make it up. Nor is there any machinery for enforcing the prescriptions of the code. What does that mean? There's no machinery. You've got no policeman. Yes? So you can do things in the secrecy of your own home or when no one's looking and there's no machinery for some of this stuff. There is too much in it that seems rather to be good advice or direction for leading a righteous life. A life becoming to an Israelite, which would mean a good citizen and a servant of God, than actual law. For instance, now he's going to give some examples. If there be with you a poor man, one of his brethren, within any of thy gates in thy land, which God gives to you, then you shall not harden your heart, nor shut thy hand from thy poor brother. What does that say? Simply put. What does that say, simply put? Help your neighbour. So what about if you said, I don't want to help them? What's the crime that you've done, and what's the punishment that you're going to receive? None. You can't enforce it. And there's no penalty for it. Because you'd have a whole book that dealt with just that one issue, wouldn't you? Because what help did they want? And if you're not going to help them, it's different levels of crime if you want to start getting into details. So what is this? Is this a law in its normal legislative sense? Is that what this is? No, it's not. We know it's not. It's not enforceable. We agree with that? So there's bad behavior between us. And what do? If you're an elder or a leader or someone in a responsible position, what do? You give them some good advice and say what? Behave properly. Let's not do that. Let's be sensible. Yes? Let's treat one another properly. What could we do? We say, you shouted at that sister, so now that means, let's look at the crime. You shout at your sister, you can't come to church for 3 weeks. Or, you have to give a 2,000 shilling fine for that. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? We don't have the people to enforce it. We don't have an executive branch to actually carry out all of that dirty work. We don't have a judiciary that interprets what's right and what's wrong. And we don't have a legislative branch that actually is going to codify that principle. So what do we say? Try to behave properly. It's good. That's what he says here. Much of Deuteronomy is that. It's not laws in the way we normally approach or look at it. So then he says, this, what we've just read, can in no sense be treated as a law in the hard technical sense of that word. It stands exactly on a level with an exhortation, a couple of them, that are given in the New Testament. So he's now going to go to New Testament examples. Be not wise in your own conceits. What does that mean? Be not wise in your own conceits. Sister Schneider, what does that mean? Paraphrase, be not wise in your own conceits. Don't trust your own judgment. So how can you enforce that? I said someone gave me some advice. So it's all their fault. It's their problem. Yes? Can you enforce something like that? Of course it's not. What would we call that? If I called it good advice, would you agree that's just good advice? One of the prophets or Jesus said that. You'd put that on the level of good advice. God is giving us some good advice. Yes? Not some law. Everyone okay with that? So when Jesus says something, he just says, let me give you a bit of advice. Another one. Render to no man evil for evil. Can you enforce that law? So does it have all the properties of law? It doesn't have the normal properties what we would consider law to be. Do you agree with that? Yes? Do you agree with that? Yes. Render to no man evil for evil. Is that a law or just good advice? Not a law. So, be not wise in your own conceits. Your own conceits means your own selfish thoughts. Don't think you're cleverer than other people. Is that a law? Good advice. I think that came from Jesus. So you're okay with that? So when Jesus tells you to do something, it's not law, it's good advice. Everyone okay with that? Repeat and enlarge the Ten Commandments. So is it enforceable? It's not enforceable, so it's not law. Okay? Because the thing is, when we consider law, it has to have certain properties to it. And the properties that it has to have teeth. That means it has to have punishment. And to punish someone, you have to have a punisher. Someone who does the punishment. And then you have to have someone who actually sets the guidelines, sets the rules. So unless you're going to do that, you can't call it law in its classic sense. Yes? Anybody want to make a comment that they disagree with what we're discussing here? This is about an approach to inspiration. And all of us have said in a really casual fashion, yeah, this is good advice coming from Jesus. And I'm certain before this class, if I'd asked the question in a slightly different way, very few of you would have said that. When Jesus speaks, it is written, it's law, punishable by death, and you don't have any leeway. I'm sure most of us would have taken that perspective. And now, you're all softening up. Now you're all looking at it in a different way. And the reason for that is not because you don't understand things or you've just become soft. It's why. Because now what are we doing? We're codifying and defining what something is. What law is. That's what this person wants to do. He wants us to understand what law is. And most of us are not approaching the subject properly. It's done in this really lazy fashion. And then depending what time of day it is, I say, you people are all lawbreakers. Because when I go to your garden, you mix in your fruits and vegetables. And they say, that's silly. I'm saying, no, it's law. And then I say, you know what? Women are wearing men's trousers. And that's okay, isn't it? They say, of course it's not. That's a real crime. Because it's an abomination. So all I'm saying is, if we're going to start thinking about what is law and what is not law, we need to have two things. Let's put it simply. You need to have execution. That means you need to do something about the mess. And before you can do something about the mess, the problem, what do you have to have? My sister, what do you have to have? You have to have an investigation. What will you investigate? The crime. And you'll check that against what? You're going to execute and you have to have this second thing. You have to have a penalty. So as soon as you give penalties, all I'm going to say is that you have to have a code. You have to have explicit details. Yes? Which means you have to understand exactly what the crime is. Are we okay with that? You can't be left to guesswork if you're going to make it into a law or a rule that's executable. Yes? So, all I wanted us to see, let me check if I finished reading this. So he says, New Testament, be not wise, render no evil, and rather sets up an ideal of conduct which is to be striven after, than establishes a law which must be complied with. Can we see the difference between that? Because what we will tend to do is we'll say this, which is what someone just said, this is the spirit of the law, and that is the letter of the law. You heard of that? Yeah? Not only have you heard of that, you say that. And if you don't say it, your next door neighbour says that. We'll go for the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. What on earth does that even mean, the spirit or the letter? If you have any kind of system of law, do they ever care about the spirit of the law? They don't. You know, I walked past a shop and I had in my spirit, I wanted to go and rob them. So therefore, what is a policeman going to come and do? Arrest me. I'm going to go to court. I'm going to get sentenced for 20 years imprisonment. Why? Because I thought about robbing. Who agrees with that? None of you do. The world, the real world, the world in which we operate does not work on the spirit of the law, does it? It can't do, because it's not enforceable. It doesn't have the properties of law. The only way you can deal with law is what? The letter of the law. It means it has to have a code which everyone understands, multiple people can read, they can all come to the same conclusion. And then you have to have sentencing guidelines, and then you have to have someone to enforce that law. Are we okay with that? If we're going to frame law in that way, we need to be careful how we approach much of our interpersonal conduct, and we have to be careful how we approach inspiration. Because what we tend to do, and the thing is, we all know this, we all know there are some things which are law and some things which are warm, mushy feelings. And we pick and choose what we want to do according to our own conscience. And Jesus deals with people like that. He says, in fact, actually other people say that about, because they don't like things, who made you a judge and a ruler over us? Because that's the question I'd want to ask you. Who made you a ruler and a judge to work out what is law and what is good advice for me? And you could say the same about me to you. And we would say, God did. As soon as you're going to start blaming God for making you a judge or a ruler, you need to have a lot in place. You need to have codified statements. Then you have to have guidelines for the punishment. Then you have to have someone to enforce it. Do we agree with what we've spoken about so far? It's all about the approach, all about trying to define what law is. Yes? There is no punishment prescribed for disobedience. All that follows, if a man does harden his heart against a poor brother, is the sting of conscience, which brings home to him that he is not living according to God's will. Yeah, we can all experience that. Your conscience might smite you, but it's not breaking the law. Everybody agree? We take up an offering and we say, be generous in your giving. And you only give a couple of shillings for the offering, and you could have given more. Have you broken the law? What law have you broken, Brother Andrew? Find me the verse, show me the code, and tell me what the punishment was. Sorry? You're looking at it. There's nothing to look at because you won't find it anywhere. You know you won't. Rather than saying you're looking at it, I would suggest say, yeah, I made a mistake. Actually what it is good advice. It's not a law because law has to have certain properties to it. And what we say is, don't worry, it's God's law, God will punish them. That's our typical excuse. It's not in our hands to deal with the mess. God will deal with the mess. Because that's what most of us are going to say. God will take his vengeance, we'll leave it. Is that how we're supposed to operate? Is it? So a brother in our congregation is abusing his wife. What should we do? It's not our problem. God will sort the problem out afterwards. He'll be punished in the afterlife. Is that how we approach the problem? If it's not, then we should have rules, we should have codes, and we should have punishment. Do we? Do we? We don't have any guidelines on if a husband abuses his wife, we just say, carry on, we can't do anything about it. See, we do have sentencing guidelines. We can disfellowship the person. So you know it's law. So there's some things that are law, some things that aren't. The things that are not law, we should be careful about how we deal with those things. Because when we start saying, oh, you're a criminal, but we can't touch you, we have to be careful about approaching things in that way because that's what we tend to do. We tend to take good advice and turn it into punishment, and we lament that we're not judges and executors because we want to be. Okay, so that's an overview of the book of Deuteronomy. Book of Deuteronomy means second law or repeat of the law. We've already discussed that. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, we can break it up into different sections. Who has had a look at that? The different sections to break it up into. Who's had a look? No one's had a look? Don't look now. Just look in your notes that you took when you did your study. Brother Wilson, can you break it down? Have you done that? You didn't? I know you're busy. Sister Debbie, did you have a chance? Okay, so what I want us to do is break the book into different sections and you give me the beginning verse or chapter and the end verse or chapter so we can break it down. Could you do that? No? Tell me what you were going to say.
Okay, I saw like there are some laws that were governing them in the wilderness, that stopped in the wilderness. And then there are some laws that govern them in this country.
So there are some laws that govern you in the wilderness and some laws that govern you in Canaan. And I think we discussed this briefly. Did we discuss this briefly in our last class? Yes, briefly. That part of our approach to Deuteronomy, we can't just say it's repeat and enlarge. You can't just say that. To say, oh, it's just the second statement of what we've already said. In a general sense it is, but it's not just that. Because the rules, some of the laws or the rules that were in the wilderness, you can't bring into Canaan. So the book of Deuteronomy is specifically for how to behave in the land of Canaan. Are we okay with that? Does that make it dispensational? Yeah? Anybody disagree or anybody want to comment on that? By definition, it makes it dispensational because Sister Debbie said there are some rules for the wilderness and some rules for Canaan. Yes? So the ones in Deuteronomy are not the rules for Canaan. Sorry, not the rules for the wilderness. Yeah? In Deuteronomy, there are some rules for the wilderness. Do you know any of them?
Okay, know whether they'll be like keeping the Sabbath and making what and what like they did in the wilderness. Now I thought of maybe the Sabbath would be kept in a different way when they reach Canaan. So
Okay, so I'm taking that principle. When they go to Canaan, they're going to keep Sabbath differently. That means Deuteronomy is going to be given to them at the end of the wilderness, at the beginning of Canaan. That's where Deuteronomy is given, yes? He gives a speech, he writes the speech down, and he says, here's the speech in the book. So he gives them to them at the end of the wilderness, so it's not going to be helping them for the wilderness behavior, is it? Because that's already ended. So he wouldn't give them law for wilderness behavior at the end of the wilderness. He should have done that at the beginning, because it's a bit late now. You agree with that? So the laws must be for Canaan. You agree with that? So just that very principle, in the wilderness there's Sabbath laws, in Canaan there's Sabbath laws. And there are some differences. Even if there's subtle differences, there are differences. Which brings us to the point, the principle, that Deuteronomy in its very nature is a dispensational subject or issue. Do you agree with that? Yeah? So we have to work out which bits are dispensational, which ones that we carry on from the past, and which ones would carry on into the future. Are we okay with that? Any questions, anyone? Okay, so let's go down and see if we can break down the chapter a little bit. The book, sorry. Brother William. Section 1. I'll do the hard bit. Chapter 1, verse 1. Chapter where? Chapter 4. So we'll do just 4. Chapter 1 to chapter 4.
Then we have chapter 5 to 11.
Then we want to go from chapter 5 to chapter 11. Twelve to 26. You're not sure about the last one? So we're in 27. And when does 27 end? That's what you're not sure about. It's going to go all the way to 34. So at least we've broken it down into certain sections. Anybody want to change that? Brother Benjamin, you want to change that a little bit? 27 to 32. Then 33 to 34. So that gives us some idea about how we can break this down. And our verse is here, 22 verse 5. So what's section 1 about? What's the subject of section 1? So we'll go with history. Section 2, 5 to 11. Commandments. Sorry? The commandments, so the 10 commandments. So we'll call that the commandments. (12 to 26). Sorry? So I'm going to call it, you said what? How to behave in Canaan. So, laws for Canaan. 27 to 32. So the blessings and the curses. So the blessings and the curses is based upon what? It's based upon this, isn't it? Yeah? When they're going to do this? The beginning of wilderness, the end of wilderness, beginning of Canaan, end of Canaan. When? At the beginning of Canaan. So they've come out of the wilderness, gone into Canaan. The first thing they're going to do is the blessing and the curse. And what they're going to say? Roughly. A blessing if you do the thing, and a curse if you don't. Do what? The laws and the statutes? 33 to 34. 33 to 34. Okay? All this story starts when? What's the date? So we'll go with the 1st of November in the 40th year. It's not the 1st of November, we know that, yes? It's the first day of the 11th month. So I just called it for us, 1st of November. Yeah? And here we are in Joshua. Where's this? Where did we say this was? Sorry? Speak louder. Oh, sorry, January. What day? So it's the 10th of January. Where did you find that from? My brother? Yeah, where? Verse? 4:19. We read 4:19, is that right? Yeah? 4:19, it gives you the date. How many days is that? 70? So we're mixing our calendars now. Yes? We're mixing our calendars. Yeah? Because we've got 30 and 30 and 10. Okay? So this is the 41st year. And we've got 70 days. So it doesn't tell you here in Deuteronomy, so maybe someone knows, we're not going to return to it. Moses dies somewhere, no, not somewhere, sometime in this history, in chapter 33, 34. Yeah? When he dies, they mourn for him. How many days do they mourn for him? Because so many people knew the answer. Do you know where it's found? So someone give us the reference for that. Numbers? Oh, Deuteronomy. Verse. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 34, verse 8. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Then we get to Joshua 1, chapter 1, and how many days? From chapter 1 to chapter 4. We looked at verse 11, chapter 1, verse 11. What does he say? In 3 days. So we've got 3 here. Are we okay with that? 3 days, 30 days. So how many days are here? So we'll go with 37. So don't get fixated about the numbers. I'm not doing anything with these numbers. What are they doing for 37 days? From the beginning of Deuteronomy to the death of Moses, what are they doing? I want to ask that question in a different way. So the book of Deuteronomy, how long is that book? The duration, all the details of it, how long is that occurring over? 1 day? Or all of this period? Do you understand the question? Is all of the book of Deuteronomy all happening in 1 day? All of this instruction, everything that we're reading, or is it over a period of time? Anybody thinks it's 1 day? So we all say it's over a period of time. Yeah? Now if you were to read the book of Deuteronomy, could you read it in a day? Easily. You can easily read Deuteronomy in a day. You know that. If you've got an audio Bible, just put it on. In fact, you can go onto Google and find out how long it would take to read it. Take a couple of hours. It doesn't take that long to read Deuteronomy. If it doesn't take that long to read it, it doesn't take that long to speak it. So he could have done that all in a day. So what we know is that there's this period of time here where all of this instruction is being given. Agree with that? Yeah? And all we have is some record of it, which is the book of Deuteronomy. So either he's doing like half an hour every day, I don't know what they're doing for the rest of the day, or these are summary thoughts of all the instruction that Moses is giving to them. I don't know which, but all I want us to see is this is not happening all on 1 day. It's happening over a period of time. Why does that become significant? Why would that become significant? Anybody got a thought? Brother Robert, what are your thoughts? No thoughts? No thoughts? It's a miracle. Is there any thoughts? Anyone else? What was my question? I've forgotten it. Brother Robert threw me then. My question is, why is it significant this is happening over a month? If we say it that way. Chapter 1, verse 38. What does it say? Chapter 1, verse 38 says what? Go ahead, yeah. Chapter 1, verse 38 says what? Sorry? Okay, I don't want to express that way. No, don't read the verse. Express it another way. What do we know about Joshua? If he's going into Canaan, what do we know about him? He's been set apart. We'll go with that. At the beginning of all of this discourse, we'll say day 1. What's he telling everybody? Joshua is the leader. Is that the only time he's going to tell everybody Joshua is the leader? Where were we looking at when we found out that Joshua was the leader? Chapter 31. Someone find, you know the verse? Someone find the verse. Chapter 31, verse 4. We'll go to 31:4. Not verse 4. Verse 7, 31:7. And Moses called unto Joshua and said unto him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and of a good courage, for thou must go with this people unto the land which the Lord hath sworn unto thy fathers. So is 31:7 the same event as 138? Is that the same event? Sister Beatrice, is that the same event? So I didn't hear you? They're saying the same thing. We all agree with that, hopefully. But is it the same event? You don't know, or the answer is no? Which one? It's not the same event? You've got to look at me. You've got to make eye contact. I can't see. Not the same event. Okay? So she says it's not the same event. Do we all agree? Everybody agree? You think it's the same event? So, chapter 138 happens here or here? Here. So, what's happening all the way through here? We're in chapter 1 here, and we're in chapter 31 here, because you're saying they're the same event. So, what chapters are all the way through here?
I think what was portrayed at the first was the one being fulfilled at the 38th.
My question is, the words in chapter 1, which includes verse 38,
The same word, but it doesn't happen in the same event. It's different.
so they're different events. So you agree with her, yeah? Chapter 1 is here, and chapter 31 is here. The same statement, he's going to be the boss, he's going to be the boss, but they happen at different times. So we all agree with that, yeah? So we already have evidence that we have repeated and enlarged going through this story. The evidence, firstly, was that it's happening over a 37-day period. We can see that. Just the numbers tell us that. And then we can see in chapter 1, where he gives the historical setting, the end of that historical setting is what? That he's going to die and Joshua's going to take over. And then by the time you get to the end, what's he going to say? The same thing. So he either explains it in a slightly different way, or he gives the same information, but you can see this repeat and enlarge technique going on, but it's not the same event. We all okay with that? Yeah? So once we can see that this is happening over an extended period of time, when it starts talking about the law, no, let me say it in a different way. When he speaks about Joshua here, I said it's basically the same thing that he's saying. Is it exactly the same? No, there are some subtle differences between them, isn't it? He's going to explain Joshua's role here in a certain perspective, or in a certain narrative. When he's going to make Joshua the leader here, he's going to give it from a different perspective again, even though it's the same subject. Are we okay with that? Yeah, looking at the same issue from a different perspective. let's say it this way. Now, I'm not saying this is the definitive way. It could even be wrong, but I want to give an example. He says, for example, Joshua's going to be the boss here because I sinned. Yeah? Joshua's going to be the boss here because I'm old and tired. We can see that. Yeah? Now, I know that Moses, his eye was not abated and he was still as strong, could have carried on. So I just want to give, just to show us that we can see it from different perspectives. That's what I wanted us to see. So if we can see that, when we start looking at the word law, and we start looking at the word song, we can start seeing how those two words are also used in a specific fashion throughout the book. Now, what's happening over 37 days? What is Moses doing? We just step back and we just say, what is he doing? Simply put, an overarching thought. Sorry? Singing. So he's singing. I want to maybe make it not so abstract. That's correct. He's singing for 37 days. But that's an abstract thought. I want it to be more concrete. So he's speaking about the law that they need for what? For the coming dispensation. So he says, let me prepare you. So the book of Deuteronomy is a preparation for their next dispensation, for their future life, if we can say that. Just that concept, if you see it that way, should teach us a lot about how we approach inspiration. That the law is more fluid than we might think. It's not as rigid as we might understand. When you understand dispensationalism, even in the way Moses is using it. Our sister gave us the example about lighting fires as one example. The big difference is in the wilderness, how did they eat? What did they eat? Manna. When you get to Canaan, you have to cook your food. It's a huge difference in the way you sustain yourself. It requires a different approach to cooking. Substantially different approach to cooking. The other problem is, when they're in the wilderness, what part of the country are they in? A desert. They're in a desert land. When they go to Canaan, what kind of a land is it? It's a land filled with brooks and hills and mountains. It's a totally different climate. So we have to consider all of these things. Man was not made for law. Law was made for man. Is that correct? Yeah? So that means laws change over time, depending upon the needs that humanity have. We're all okay with that? We're all okay with that, but we don't apply or approach Scripture in that way, and that's our problem. We don't approach Scripture in an intelligent fashion. We do it like robots. If you go to English history, as Luddites, with old technology, with old ways of seeing it. Or as some people would say, with a conservative perspective. And conservative in the negative sense, to conserve, hold on to traditions. And we need to really think about how we approach this. So what he's going to do over 37 days, there's not that much to do. It's not like doing a chapter a day. That would be about 10 minutes. What's he doing over this time period? He's going to explain what things go on, and then what will he do? 2 weeks later. Repeat what he said with a different perspective. Then repeat what he said with another perspective. He'll say, okay, we're on day 21. What will we do? Let's summarize what we've already said so far. Yeah? Moses is a teacher above all things, so he understands how to teach, and everyone knows, any decent teacher knows, you need to do repeat and enlarge technique. And what we would say is you need to summarize. Or if you're writing a document, you give an introduction, tell people what you're going to say it, and then you give a conclusion to say, this is what I've already told you. He's going to do this for over a month. So when we start talking about the Song of Moses, or the Law of Moses, we need to approach it in what I will call, which people might not agree with the term, in a liberal fashion. We become so dogmatic in what the song was or what the law was. Now, yesterday, when we looked at all of this, we saw song in what chapter? 31. So we went backwards and we said the song is what? All of this. There it is, the law. So the song is 12 to 26. 14 chapters. That's what we said yesterday. Yeah? We're in Deuteronomy chapter 31. We read all through chapter 31, and then we get to the last verse. So we get to the last verse. If you've got subtitles in your Bibles, what's the title? Put your hand up. Which we would call the Song of Moses. Yeah? So the Song of Moses is actually in what chapter? Sorry? Not Exodus 15. It's going to be repeated, remember? You have to have a new song. You can't have that. What was that song for? What was that song for? Exodus 15 song. What's the purpose of that song? So my brother says for their salvation, not for the salvation. Not celebration. What was that song for? The first one, 15. You're all correct. It was a celebration, all of that. Sorry? That's the same thing as a celebration. When did they do the song? When they do the song, we'll tell you what the purpose of the song is. When did they do the song? They do it at the beginning of the wilderness. Why? What's the song? What's the purpose of the song? The purpose of the song. So the purpose of the song, my brother said it was a warning that they're about to enter into the wilderness. If we will say a warning or a reminder of what has happened in the past, so that when you go into the wilderness, you'll have faith or confidence in what? Or in whom? In God. So it is a victory in all of that, but the purpose of the song is to guide them and lead them through the future history. And what happens after about 2 days? They forget the song. So now he's going to sing another song. And this song is not the same song as 15. Agree with that, Brother Rogers? Yeah? We could say it's the same song because it's repeated in large. If you want to cut the story up and make them time at the ends, the beginning of a new dispensation, they're the same song. But they have different characteristics. That's why it's easy to see that they're the same song, but they're different. Can we see that it's a clear story of dispensationalism? Yeah? Chapter 15, Exodus, is the song for the wilderness dispensation, and this is the song for the glorious land dispensation. Yeah? So, we said the song was all these chapters before, but where is the song? In the book of Deuteronomy, where is the song? It's chapter 32. It says it in your Bibles, verse 32, verse 30. 31:30. My one says, Moses' song of victory and parting admonition. I'll read. And Moses spake in the ears of all the congregation of Israel the words of this song until they were ended. And now he's going to sing the song. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. So he's going to speak the song in verse 32. But in verse 31, what did it say? Conceptually.
Which book is that?
We're all in Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy. I read 31:30, which was the introduction to the song. Then I gave the first sentence for the song in chapter 32. And then I'm going to suggest it ends in verse 52, because in chapter 33 it says, "And this is the blessing wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death." Which was the blessing? The song, which is chapter 32. That was the blessing that he gave them. And he said, "The Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. He shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints from his hand." You can carry on reading on. So yesterday we said that the song was the law, and that was all the previous things. You okay with that? So all I want us to see is that the way we think about law or song, even in the book itself, is in different ways, multiple perspectives. That's all I want to show us. Yeah? So when we become rigid about what is a song and what is the law, I think we get ourselves into a mess. Because if we want to say, we can see that the song was the law. Could we see that? How do we proof text that? How do we proof text law is song? Sister Joy. Just give us the verses that we used. If you remember. Just a simple proof text that we used. Chapter 31, the verses 19 and 22, you said? Is that what you said? 19 and 22? I'm asking what he said. And 19 and 24. So 19 says, "Now therefore write the song." And 24 said, "And it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law." Yeah? So we took all of that, and he makes an end of all of that. And then in the end of the chapter, beginning of chapter 32, he says, "Now I'm going to sing the song to you." And the song in 32 is not any of the words that came before. Yeah? So even the way the book is dealing with this word song is in this multiple, repeat and enlarge way. Everybody okay with that? So does that mean what we were said yesterday was wrong? Anybody think we were wrong? No? All good? Okay, so we looked in chapter 31 yesterday, and we went to verse 9. Someone took us to verse 9. And it says, "And Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto the priests, son of Levi, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and unto all the elders of Israel." So verse 9 says he wrote the law. And which verse did we just read? We just read verse 24. In verse 24 it says, "And he gave Joshua..." did we read verse 24? "And it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished." So how do we reconcile verse 9 and verse 24? How can he write two books, two laws, my brother? How do you reconcile verse 9 and verse 24?
But what I'm seeing that the song and the law they are different, because if you come
Sorry, the song?
and the law,
Okay, I'm not, in verse 9, it says what? Wrote the law.
there's a man on it.
Verse 9, it says the law. You can see that? Writes the law. Verse 24, it says writes the law. So I'm not doing song and law. It says law and law. Explain that.
verse 24 is telling us the ending of the work. But
The ending of.
the writing of the law.
So verse 9 is the beginning of the writing and verse 24 is the end of the writing. Is that what you're saying? Do you agree with that?
What did he say?
He said verse 9, we're looking at verse 9 and verse 24. Verse 9 says he wrote and verse 24 says he wrote. So I'm saying, how do we approach that in one verse? He says verse 9 is the beginning of the writing, verse 24 is the end of the writing. Is that how you read it? Beginning and the end.
Because verse 1 he said this law. So, and if you go to the previous verse, you cannot see where he has talked about that law. And in the previous study, we found that when you talk about this, you cannot tell when you have not explained to people what this means. Which means, when you go down, it's going to explain what this means.
So in verse 9, is he writing the law and speaking, verse 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15? He's speaking to people and writing, and when he's finished speaking, he's finished writing.
Pardon? I'm saying, in verse 9,
Verse 9, he begins to write.
verse 9 is saying, and Moses wrote this law.
Yeah, he begins to write in verse 9. When is he finished writing?
In verse 24.
Okay, so tell me what's happening between the beginning and the end. Is he speaking to people in verse 10 to 23?
I think he's right.
No, but he's speaking. All of that is speaking. He's speaking to people in those verses. We already read that. He's not writing, he's speaking. So is he speaking and writing at the same time? Are all the verses out of order? Sorry?
I don't think whether he can do that thing.
He can't write and speak at the same time. So what you're going to do with verse 10 to 23, if you're going to make verse 9 and 24 the beginning and the ending of writing? Or did he begin to write in verse 9, stop writing, speaks, and then carries on writing?
I want to reverse something.
You want to reverse your position.
So when you come to verse 25 is the same as verse 9.
Don't prove it to me. Just tell me what you want to say now between verse 9 and 24.
So 24 comes first, then after 24, then verse 9.
So 24 comes first and then 29.
Yeah, after you have finished, then 9, verse 9. Because how is between verse 9 and verse 24? That is what you were asking. So he's going to finish writing verse 24. After he finishes writing, he's going to hand it to the burden, please.
Okay, so in verse 9, he's going to deliver it to the priest in verse 9, it says. Yeah? He's going to give it to the priest in verse 9. And in verse 25, what's he going to do? 25 and 26, what's he going to do?
25 is this.
25 and 26, what is he going to do? My brother, what's he going to do in 25 and 26?
Getting him right, then he's like saying that.
No, not him, right? Just you tell me what 25 and 26 is. What is Moses going to do in 25 and 26? According to you.
He's giving the book of the law to the priest and the Levites.
So in 25 and 26, he's giving the book to them. Do you agree with that? And in verse 9, he's doing the same thing. So how do you connect 9 and 24 together?
I'm saying that 24 is the passive, then 9 and 9 now is the second event. After you have finished writing, it's going to hand it.
So give me the sequence. 24, 9,
Yeah, 9 is the same.
then 25.
9 is the same as 25. They are not different.
So 9 is the same as 25.
Yeah.
Brother Rogers. Brother Rogers. Say that again. So Brother Roger said that I'll write it down what he said. He said 9a and 9b is 24 and 25 and 26. He writes, he gives. Who disagrees with that? He writes the law in 9 and he gives the law. And then in 24 he writes the law, and in 25 and 26 he gives the law. Any problems with that? You disagree, my sister? Why do you disagree? You don't think he delivered it twice? I think Brother Rogers said it's a repeat and enlarge. He only delivers it once. It's just two different versions of the same story. It's same event. It's not even the same story. It's the same event. Verse 9, the event is, I gave it to the priests, and then the same event explains what giving to the priest looks like. It looks like not only giving them some instruction, but telling them what to do with the book. Do you agree? Good, we all agree. So it's a simple way of just showing that it's repeat and enlargement right here, even in chapter 31. So we've run out of time. I want to summarize. Oh, last point. Can I just stop you for a moment to summarize? So verse 9 and 24, giving of 20. So they're connected. 9 and 24 are connected, but it's different context. Okay? Is it the same event? Same event, different context. Give us the two contexts. So from verse 9 and a few verses down, he says, I'm going to give you the book, then every 7 years, you need to read it to the people. So in chapter 24 and onwards, it says, take this book and put it by the law, because this is a forgetful people. And that will help them to remember, when they remember that there's a book there, that same book that they're going to read every 7 years. So it's the same thing, but just two different contexts. So we're all in agreement. So I want to summarize. When we approach the book of Deuteronomy, in fact, when we approach inspiration, we need to be careful. What we tend to do is use law in a dangerous, loose, or cavalier fashion. If you're going to start talking about law, you need to start talking in terms of the judiciary, those people who define and explain law, those people who actually write law, the legislative arm, and those who execute law. It has to be considered on multiple levels. Now, there's too much instruction in this book that does not fit that criteria. If you just tell people to be nice, if you tell people to be nice, it's not a law that's enforceable. Therefore, by definition, it doesn't become a law. It becomes what? Good advice. And we have problems with good advice because it sounds like we're lowering the standards. Looks like we're disregarding clear instruction from God. So we'll come one that's no, we won't. So that's one thing that we did in the class. We saw how we should be approaching this problem. Then what we began to look at is this concept that this story happens over a month's period. It's not all happening in one day. It could have all been done and dusted in a day, but it doesn't. Which means that he's saying this thing over and over again in repeated fashions. We gave evidence for that. Chapter 1 is at the beginning. Chapter 31 is at the end. It's not all happening on the same day. There's over a month between them. And he's going to say the same thing. Joshua's your leader. Joshua's your leader. And then he's going to give different perspectives of why Joshua is the leader in those stories. Then we gave another evidence of that, which is the song. Yesterday we said the song is all of this. Specifically this. We could argue that it went back even to chapter 5. The song was that law. We proof text that. But then you actually find out, which no one said yesterday, actually the song is only those few verses in chapter 30. It's a song, I'll say it this way, put to music, put to a rhythm that you're supposed to memorize. And I don't think they put the whole of this thing to music in that kind of fashion. But perhaps chapter 32 is what they put to music. It's containable, it's well defined. So as we start approaching what song is, you can see it's chapter 32, but in chapter 31, the law is expressed in a different way. And the song is, isn't it? Because by the time you get to the end of 31, the law has been spoken, the song has been sung, it's all been written down. And then he says in 32, let me sing the song again. And it's not the same song, it's a different song. It's different words, much shorter. So what we can see is this concept of song or law in this book is over multiple events, what we would call simply repeat and enlarge. So if we're okay with that, when we start talking about the law and we start talking about the song, then we need to be careful, and I would say we need to be generous in how we approach this whole subject. And if we say the law, what do we mean by law? Good advice. Mostly when you go to this book, because what we're calling law back here, it's not even law in its technical sense, is it? It's good advice because it's not enforceable. It doesn't have all the properties of law, even though it calls it law. So as we approach verse 5, I want us to be careful of how we approach it. And we haven't even still begun to look at the literal, the spiritual application. We haven't even done any of that yet. But just that we should be on guard about how we approach. There are too many people who are approaching it in the wrong fashion. And I want to say this, which will upset people. When Ellen White approaches this subject here, how does she approach it? I'll give you an option, A or B. A, good advice. B, law. How does Ellen White approach it, my brother? Law. How do you approach it? Sorry? Good advice. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you. Lord, even though we might speak the words of life in a light and joyous fashion, we know that these are serious subjects that we are handling, life and death issues. May each of us, as we approach your word, come into the unity of the faith, that we would begin to understand these things in the same way. We know there's not harmony in your movement today, but it's your desire and your will that there should be. Help us, Lord, to be able to understand how to approach the living word. Be with us and bless us, Father, for we ask and pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.